Hey y'all, it's Lydia Foxglove at Foxglove Manga, and this is the inaugural video of my manga channel, which I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I kind of have, my room's a little bit of a mess. I have some new bookshelves on order, so that should be coming tomorrow, and so I'm gonna kick it off with a little recommendation video where I talk about some of my favorite Japanese historical manga. I also have different kind of themed outfits when applicable. Not everything will, but so today I have a thrift store kind of cotton, not really a kimono technically, but that's what most people would call it, and a 70s vintage shirt with some flapper girls on it. And I'm gonna talk to you about 3 of my favorite historical titles. So if you're interested in the content to come, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. So let's get started. So today I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite Japanese historical manga, as opposed to other types of historical manga set in other places. So I'm going to start with an old favorite of mine, Kaze Hikaru. This is one of the first manga that I bought a lot of when I got back into collecting, so as you can see I have some kind of not so great copies. At the time I was just buying things to read. Kaze Hikaru does not have the best start, I will say this. I bought the first 10 at once, and it was a good thing that I did because I bought them in New York City when I was on a used bookstore tour kind of while I was there, and I bought 10 at once and I started reading them on the train. It was like, you know, a 3-hour train ride. And I was not impressed with the first volume. It's about a girl who joins the Shinsengumi, which some of you may know from Kenshin. And in fact, I would recommend, if you have the opportunity, to watch the Rurouni Kenshin Kyoto arc before you read this. It helps kind of ground you in the history. Because this manga, I'm almost impressed that they're still bringing this over. It gets very deep into the history. This is not a manga that you could easily just translate by yourself. There's a lot of history. It's a little confusing at first. There's a lot of historical factions thrown at you. She joins the Shinsengumi disguised as a boy. Not that she looks very much like a boy, but it's manga, so hey. She kind of has a bit of a history, I want to say, with this main kind of guy who she kind of falls for over the course of the story. And when it starts, she's disguised as a boy. There's a lot of really kind of goofy slapstick, and just it's a little off-putting at first. It just kind of seems goofy more than anything. Kind of a lot of wacky faces, so I was kind of reading it and I'm like, nah, this is kind of dumb. But I stuck with it because I was on the train, and then it starts to really click. It becomes very character-oriented, and I really started to enjoy just how the series develops as you kind of get to know all the Shinsengumi. It's very much a slice of life, almost as much as it's historical, because there's a lot of, I want to say it's up to issue 28 currently, and I want to say this whole thing takes place over the first little section of the actual history. I know it's much farther along in Japan, which is cruel. They translate it at a rate of 1 volume a year here. I feel like someone at Shoujo Beat must just really love this series. I can't imagine that they're making any money on it. If you want to collect the series, some of the early volumes have gone out of print and are getting a little hard to find, so you might want to look for a lot or some kind of way to find it cheaply where you kind of get I know volume 5 is kind of tricky now. And then you have to wait with me for a year for them to release a new volume. But if you stick with the early volumes, it does get worth it. It's also fun if you've watched or read Kenshin to see how they interpret these historical characters in a very different way. Saito Hajime was my favorite in Kenshin, and in here he's just let me see if I can find a picture of him. So if you've read Kenshin, it's fun to see the different interpretations of the characters that you might know from that. So, like, here's Saito Hajime. He's one of my favorite characters in the Kenshin anime. In here, he's very just kind of stoic and dorky. He's got the traditional kind of samurai hair, which is not the hottest thing. But on the other hand, you have Hijikata. He's kind of a little more broody. He's a little bit more of the sexy character. And then there's Okita, who's charming. You'll also see Sanosuke, who you'll know from Kenshin if you've ever watched that. And yet, despite how different the characters are, I still can kind of see how they're both could be drawn from the same person in real life. Another thing I love about this manga is that in the back there'll be usually some extensive little historical notes. Her little Kaze Hikaru diary where she talks about the stuff she researched, where all of it came from historically. That's just a lot of fun to read. I learned a lot about, like, the hairstyles of the time, and I also just like how just kind of clean and classic the shoujo art is. It's not, like, the sexiest or most beautiful thing, but it's very, just kind of, just very neat looking, and it's appealing to read. So that is one that I'm always recommending to people, but it is definitely like a pretty for hardcore historical fans, so I know it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but if you do enjoy Japanese history, I definitely recommend it. This is a parallel Japanese history where in this one there is a disease that it mostly kills men, and it kills like a large part of the population of men. So women end up kind of secretly ruling Japan, and it goes from, I don't know what year it starts, but, well, it's obviously a long time ago, because one of the things that puts people off from this manga is that when it starts, it's in this very Shakespearean language. Sadakichi, where art thou going? Not telling, 'tis my own secret place that nobody else knows. 'Tis not for tots to wander far away alone. And a lot of people found this translation off-putting and dropped it early on because of that. And I can see why. I had a hard time getting into the groove at first. But as it goes through the history, the language slowly, you almost don't even notice, at least I didn't. The language slowly becomes more natural as time progresses. And the plot is just, it's very interesting the way they take you through all the dealings of the imperial court, how they deal with, like, the Dutch coming and starting to bring Western culture, and how they're learning more about medicine, they're trying to solve the problems of the plague, and, like, how will that affect Japan, considering it's run by women at this point. There's a lot of just interesting kind of questions about men and women and how they deal with each other, and how they have, been in history. So it's a very kind of, I want to say almost a feminist manga, which I wouldn't call very many manga like overtly feminist, but this one really feels kind of like it is. But I don't think that, like, you don't have to be super looking for a feminist manga to enjoy it either. It's interesting, and it travels through so many different characters that it's a very sweeping saga. So it's been going on for a while. I want to say probably 2 or 3 volumes come out a year, perhaps. I'm a little behind in reading it because it's one of those manga where it comes out just infrequently enough, and it's just dense enough plot-wise that by the time a new volume comes out, I've started to forget what happens, and I really wish they had a little more of a synopsis in the beginning to remind me what's going on. But despite that, I'm looking forward to a reread to just kind of get the whole thing. Once maybe there's a good chunk. I have volume 17 on order. I want to say that's the latest one. I might just kind of reread it in a chunk and remind myself what's going on. And this is by Fumio Shinaga, who also has done many titles, mostly kind of more in the I mean, I don't want to quite say boys love because they're usually more like serious gay relationships with adult men, but they're kind of very highbrow manga generally, but enjoyably so. And there's a title that will be the most familiar to a lot of you, Golden Kamuy. This one's pretty popular. I really enjoy it a lot. One of the things that first drew me to it is that it actually deals with the culture of the Ainu. So this character, Asurpa, she is an Ainu girl, and the main character was involved in the Russo-Japanese War. There's kind of a very involved plot with treasure hunting, and they're up in kind of the northern woods looking for these men that have this map tattooed on their bodies that leads to a treasure, and it ends up being this whole plot with these covers are showing a lot of glare, sorry. It's a whole involved plot with Asurpa's father, and it's quite long. I have up to volume 16, but I have up to the current volume, which I think might be 21 on order. One of the great things I really love about this manga is that it just kind of combines a lot of elements. There's a lot of really just wacky humor. You can kind of get a sense just from the art that, like, these characters do a lot of just goofy stuff. There's a very dramatic plot going on, but at the same time, they'll go on these adventures that are just absurd and hilarious. So there's a lot of comedy. There's a lot of little bits of kind of history and culture of the time. There's tidbits of, like, lore for survival, like what plants and animals were around and were used. So you kind of learn a lot, but in a way that's, I mean, this volume just, there's so much goofy stuff happening. Right before this, there was a whole plot where they like go to the baths, and there's just so many, they have a whole fight where they're naked, and of course they're all blurred, and it's so silly. They are in the bath. So you also get, you know, a lot of, I guess, some fan service for the ladies, but in a way that's almost too silly for me to take seriously. And the characters are a lot of fun, so I really enjoy this one, and I always look forward to the new volume, and it's one of the ones that as soon as a new volume comes in, I'm picking it up and reading it as soon as I have time on my schedule. So those are 3 of my favorite Japanese historical manga. I'm also going to mention, this is a new one. I just picked it up. Golden Japanesque, A Splendid Yokohama Romance. I've not read it yet, but I was so excited to see another historical shoujo coming out that I picked it up right away. In Meiji-era Japan, 16-year-old Maria wishes she can change her appearance. And it looks cute. I don't know yet whether it's going to be good. I can't even judge a manga on the first volume anyway, so even if I had read it, I probably wouldn't review it too harshly or kindly, because I found that some manga like Ooku and Kaze Hikaru just don't really hit their stride until volume 3 or so. But I am excited to read this one. So that's my tour of Japanese historical manga. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be doing a lot more videos on all types of subjects, from recommendations to manga hauls to what I'm looking forward to reading, and of course a tour of my collection. So I hope you'll like and subscribe, and let me know if you have any Japanese historical manga that you really enjoy. Thanks so much.